Billionaire used a drone to watch his paralyzed triplets. What he saw the maid doing shocked him. The silence in the Blackwood estate was not peaceful. It was heavy. It was a weight that pressed against the chest, a thick velvet suffocating the life out of the hallways. For Ethan Blackwood, the silence was the only thing he deserved. At 32, Ethan was one of the wealthiest men in the country. A tech mogul whose innovations had reshaped the way the world communicated, yet he had never felt more isolated. His home, a sprawling modern mansion of glass and steel perched on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean, was less of a home and more of a mausoleum. It was a monument to what he had lost. He sat in his office on the 3rd floor, a room that felt more like a cockpit than a study. Monitors lined the walls displaying stock trends, global news, and live feeds from his various factories. But Ethan wasn't looking at business today. His eyes were fixed on a sleek, black object sitting on his mahogany desk. It was the Horus, a prototype surveillance drone his company was developing. It was designed for search and rescue, equipped with thermal imaging and high-definition zoom capabilities that could read a license plate from a mile away. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, which was starting to show premature streaks of grey. He needed a distraction. The anniversary was coming up. 2 years. 2 years since the car accident that had taken Sarah, his wife, his soulmate, the only person who had ever made him feel like he wasn't just a machine built for profit. The same accident that had left their 3 one-year-old sons, Noah, Liam, and Mason, trapped in their own bodies. Paralyzed from the waist down, the doctors had said. Severe spinal shock, unlikely to ever walk. The words still echoed in his head, louder than the hum of the servers in the room. He remembered the tiny casts, the expensive customized wheelchairs that looked like miniature prisons, the way the boys would look at him with wide, confused eyes. Ethan provided everything money could buy: the best neurologists from Switzerland, round-the-clock nursing staff, a sensory room that cost more than most houses. But he couldn't provide the one thing they needed most: himself. He couldn't look at them without seeing the crash. He couldn't hold them without feeling the crushing guilt that he had been the one driving, that he had walked away with scratches while his family was destroyed. He pushed his chair back and grabbed the drone controller. He needed air, but he couldn't bring himself to go outside. He didn't want to run into the staff. He didn't want to see the pity in the eyes of the housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, or the stern judgment of the head nurse. He preferred the view from above. He walked to the balcony, the glass doors sliding open with a soft hiss. The sea breeze hit him, salty and cold. He placed the drone on the railing and engaged the rotors. With a low hum, the machine lifted into the air. Ethan put on the VR headset, instantly transporting his vision into the sky. The world dropped away. Suddenly, he was flying. He pushed the throttle forward, sending the drone soaring over the slate-grey roof of the mansion. He flew over the tennis courts that were never used, over the manicured hedges that formed a maze no one played in. The freedom was intoxicating. Up here, he wasn't a widower or a failure of a father. He was just a ghost in the machine. He banked the drone left, heading toward the south lawn. This area of the estate was usually quiet, a vast expanse of green grass bordered by high oak trees. It was far enough from the main house that the noise of the ocean was muffled. As the drone glided silently through the air, the 4K camera stabilized, feeding a crystal-clear image to Ethan's eyes. He expected to see nothing but empty grass. Maybe a gardener trimming the hedges. Instead, he saw colors, bright, chaotic, impossible colors. Ethan frowned behind the headset. He zoomed in. There, in the middle of the secluded south lawn, was a massive inflatable water slide. It was a garish thing, bright red and yellow, looking completely out of place in the elegant, austere landscaping of the Blackwood estate. Water was flowing down the slide, sparkling like diamonds in the afternoon sun. Who authorized this? Ethan muttered to himself, his finger hovering over the intercom button to call security. He was about to demand it be taken down. It was dangerous. If the boys were out there in their wheelchairs, watching, it would just be cruel. A reminder of what they couldn't do. But then, movement caught his eye. He adjusted the altitude, bringing the drone lower, hovering just above the tree line. The camera focused. He saw the new maid. What was her name? Emily? Emma. Yes, Emma. She was young, maybe 25, with a messy bun of brown hair that was currently soaked. She was wearing her blue uniform, but the skirt was hitched up slightly, and her feet were bare. Her yellow cleaning gloves had been tossed carelessly onto the grass. She was standing at the bottom of the slide, her arms wide open, her head thrown back in laughter. And then Ethan saw them. Noah, Liam, Mason. They weren't in their wheelchairs. The custom-molded chairs, which cost $15,000 each, were nowhere in sight. Ethan's heart stopped. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. Where were the chairs? How were they sitting up? He zoomed in further, his hands trembling on the controller. Noah was at the top of the inflatable slide. He was sitting there, his small wet hair plastered to his forehead. He looked terrified. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He's going to fall. He can't control his legs. He's going to tumble down and break his neck. "Don't do it," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. But Noah didn't fall. He pushed himself off. He slid down, shrieking, not in pain but in pure, unadulterated joy. He splashed into the shallow pool at the bottom, and before the water even settled, he was kicking. Kicking. Ethan blinked, sure the screen was glitching, but the image was 8K resolution. There was no mistake. Noah's legs, the legs 3 specialists said were atrophied and unresponsive, were churning in the water. Then the impossible happened. Mason was next, but he wasn't at the top. He was at the bottom, near the climbing wall part of the inflatable. Ethan watched frozen as his 3-year-old son reached up, grabbed a handle, and pulled his right leg up. He planted his foot. He engaged his thigh muscle. He pushed. He was climbing. Ethan gasped, ripping the headset off his face for a second, staring at the blurred reality of the balcony, then jamming the headset back on. He had to be seeing things. He had to be hallucinating from grief or lack of sleep. He looked back at the screen. The drone hovered silently, the unobserved witness to a miracle. Liam was running. No, not running, but stumbling, wobbly, like a drunk sailor, across the grass toward Emma. He fell. Ethan flinched. But Emma didn't rush to pick him up. She didn't coddle him. She clapped her hands and called out something Ethan couldn't hear. Liam looked up, giggled, pushed himself up on all fours, and then, with a grunt of effort, stood up on his own 2 feet. He took 1 step. 2 steps. Then he fell into Emma's arms and she spun him around, hugging him tight, kissing his wet cheek. Ethan stood on the balcony, the drone controller slipping from his sweaty palms. It clattered onto the expensive tiling, but he didn't hear it. The image was burned into his retinas. His paralyzed sons were climbing. They were standing. They were playing. A mixture of emotions exploded inside him. Shock, disbelief, overwhelming joy. But then it was quickly overtaken by a dark, boiling rage. Why hadn't he been told? Why were the doctors saying there was no progress? And most importantly, why was a maid playing with his fragile, disabled children on a dangerous inflatable slide without any medical supervision? He didn't think. He didn't analyze. The father in him, the terrified protector who had failed once and vowed never to fail again, took over. He turned and sprinted back into the office, leaving the drone hovering in the sky, a silent mechanical eye watching the scene below. He had to get down there. He had to stop this madness before one of them got hurt. He had to understand why his children were walking for a stranger, but froze like statues for him. Ethan didn't wait for the elevator. He took the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, his Italian leather shoes slamming against the marble steps. The echo of his descent sounded like gunshots in the quiet house. "Mr. Blackwood?" Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper, stepped out of the kitchen as he blurred past the hallway. She held a silver tray with his afternoon espresso. "Sir, is everything—" "Get out of my way," Ethan roared, not even breaking stride. The tray clattered to the floor behind him, the porcelain shattering, but Ethan was already at the heavy oak doors leading to the back terrace. He burst out into the sunlight, the sudden brightness blinding him for a split second. The air outside was warm, smelling of cut grass and jasmine, a stark contrast to the refrigerated, sterile air of his office. He didn't stop. He ran across the patio, past the empty swimming pool, his breath coming in ragged gasps. As he rounded the hedge that separated the formal gardens from the south lawn, the sound hit him. Laughter, high-pitched, shrieking, uncontrollable laughter. It was a sound that had been absent from the Blackwood estate for 2 years. It was a sound that belonged to other families, happy families, not his broken one. He cleared the tree line and skid to a halt. The scene was exactly as the drone had shown, but seeing it with his own eyes was visceral. The grass was muddy and slick. The inflatable slide loomed large and ridiculous. And there, in the middle of it all, was Emma. She was on her knees in the grass, soaking wet, her hair plastered to her face. She was holding Mason's hands, guiding him as he stomped his feet in a puddle. "Left, right, like a soldier, Maze, march!" she was chanting. Mason was marching. His legs were shaking, his knees knocking together, but he was doing it. He was moving his own weight. Ethan felt his world tilt on its axis. The rage he had felt in the office collided with the sheer incomprehensibility of what he was seeing. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice was a thunderclap. It tore through the laughter, silencing the garden instantly. The reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Mason, startled by the shout, lost his balance and crumpled to the grass. Liam, who had been climbing the slide ladder, froze and looked toward his father with wide, terrified eyes. Noah, who was near the water, scrambled backward on his hands and knees, trying to hide behind the inflatable wall. They were terrified of him. Emma spun around, her eyes wide. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. Water dripped from her nose. When she saw Ethan standing there in his three-piece charcoal suit, his face contorted in fury, she didn't cower. She didn't look down. She instinctively moved between him and the boys. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice breathless but steady. "Get away from them," Ethan snarled, walking onto the grass. His expensive shoes sank into the mud, but he didn't care. "Step away from my children, now." "Sir, please don't scare them," Emma said, raising a hand. It was a gesture of calm, but to Ethan it looked like defiance. "Scare them?" Ethan pointed a trembling finger at Mason, who was crying silently on the ground. "You are endangering them. Who gave you permission to do this? Who authorized this death trap?" He gestured wildly at the slide. "They are paralyzed, you stupid girl. Their spines are fragile. One bad fall and they could be paralyzed from the neck down. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" He reached down to pick up Mason. "It's okay, Mason. Daddy's here. I've got you." But as he reached out, Mason flinched. The boy shrank away, pulling his knees up, his moving knees to his chest, burying his face in the grass to avoid his father's touch. Ethan froze. His hand hovered in the air, rejected. The pain of it was sharper than any physical blow. "They aren't glass dolls, Mr. Blackwood," Emma said softly. Ethan snapped his head up to look at her. "Excuse me?" "I said they aren't glass dolls," Emma repeated, her voice gaining strength. She reached down and picked up her yellow rubber gloves from the grass, clutching them like a shield. "They are 3-year-old boys, and they aren't paralyzed. Not anymore. Or maybe they never were as bad as the doctors thought. They were just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Ethan spat. "For a maid to come along and perform a miracle? I have the best neurologists in the world. They said it was impossible." "The neurologists treat the spine," Emma said, stepping closer to him, ignoring the mud splattering her uniform. "They check the nerves, they check the signals, but they don't check the heart, and they definitely don't check the will." She looked back at Liam, who was still clinging to the ladder. "Come down, Lily. Slowly. Use your legs." "Don't you dare tell him to move," Ethan warned. "I'm calling the medical team. I'm having you escorted off the property." "If you pick him up now," Emma said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper, "you will undo 3 months of work. You will tell him that he can't do it. You will confirm his fear that he is broken. Is that what you want?" Ethan hesitated. The accusation hung in the air. 3 months, he whispered. "You've been doing this for 3 months." "Every day," Emma admitted. "When you were in your office, when the nurses were on their break, we come out here. At first it was just stretching, tickling their toes until they kicked back. Then we practiced standing in the pool because the water holds them up. It makes them feel light." She gestured to the slide. "The slide isn't a death trap, sir. It's motivation. Physical therapy is painful. It's boring. It hurts. Why would a 3-year-old want to do squats? but climbing a ladder to slide down into the water. They'll do that until their muscles burn. They do it because they want to play. Ethan looked at the slide. He looked at the water. It wasn't negligence. It was brilliant. It was hydrotherapy disguised as a game. But why didn't you tell me? Ethan asked, his anger draining away, replaced by a confused desperation. Why hide it? Emma looked down at her muddy shoes. Because I was afraid you'd stop it. Mrs. Higgins said you didn't like disturbances. She said the doctors had a strict protocol: rest, immobility, braces. She looked up, her brown eyes fierce. Braces make the muscles weak, sir. They needed to move. Ethan looked at Liam on the ladder. The boy was trembling, looking back and forth between the angry giant in the suit and the kind woman in blue. Liam, Ethan said, his voice choking. Show your daddy, Liam, Emma encouraged gently. Show him how big you are. Liam took a deep breath. He gripped the slippery yellow handles of the ladder. His small leg, pale and thin but clearly defined with new muscle, lifted. He placed his foot on the next rung. He pushed. He rose. He looked at Ethan, a smile breaking through his fear. Daddy, look. The word daddy hit Ethan like a freight train. He hadn't heard them address him directly in months. Usually they were too medicated or too tired. Ethan dropped to his knees in the mud. He didn't care about the Italian wool. He didn't care about the dignity of his position. He watched his son climb. I see you, Liam, Ethan choked out, tears blurring his vision. I see you. But the moment was shattered by the sound of the back door slamming open. Mr. Blackwood! It was Ms. Havisham, the head nanny, a woman with a nursing degree and a heart of ice. She marched across the lawn, followed by 2 security guards. Her face was purple with indignation. I saw the drone feed on the security monitors, she shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at Emma. I knew it. I knew this girl was up to no good. She's abusing the children. Look at them. They are soaking wet, exhausted, forced to perform circus tricks. Ms. Havisham turned to the guards. Grab her. She's endangering the patients. That slide is a liability nightmare. No! Liam screamed from the ladder, seeing the guards approach Emma. Wait, Ethan said, standing up. Sir, you are in shock, Ms. Havisham said, her voice becoming sickly sweet but firm. This woman is a fraud. She's likely manipulating their limbs to make it look like movement. It's a common trick to get money from grieving parents. We need to get the boys back into their braces immediately before permanent damage is done. Guards, remove her. The guard reached for Emma's arm. I said, wait, Ethan bellowed. The command was so powerful, it stopped the wind. He looked at Ms. Havisham, then at Emma and finally at his sons. He was standing on a precipice. On one side was the comfortable lie he had been living, the medical reports, the hopelessness, the quiet house. On the other side was the chaotic, messy, impossible truth he had just witnessed on the drone. He looked at Emma. She wasn't fighting the guard physically, but she was looking at Ethan with an intensity that seared him. Believe your eyes, her look said, not your fears. Let her go, Ethan said quietly. But, sir, Miss Havisham started. I saw them, Ethan said, turning to the head nanny. I saw them move without help. It's a spasm, Miss Havisham insisted, opening her clipboard. Spinal reflex arc. It means nothing. It gives false hope. Sir, Dr. Aris will be furious if he finds out the protocol was broken. We need to sedate them and get them back to bed. Sedate them. The words hung in the warm air. Ethan looked at Liam, who was halfway up the slide, vibrant and alive. Then he imagined him sedated, drooling, strapped into a chair in a dark room. A fire ignited in Ethan's gut, a fire that had been extinguished the day his wife died. Nobody is touching my children, Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. He stepped between the guards and Emma. And nobody is touching this slide. He turned to Emma. Can they do it again? Emma smiled, a genuine radiant smile that transformed her face. Noah is the fastest slider. Liam is the best climber. And Mason, she looked at the boy on the ground. Mason is working on walking. Show me, Ethan whispered. No, Miss Havisham protested. I cannot allow this medical negligence. I am calling Dr. Aris right now. "Call him," Ethan said, not looking away from his sons. "Tell him to bring his team. Tell him to come right now because I want him to explain to me why the maid has done in 3 months what he couldn't do in 2 years. He looked at Emma. "Show me everything." The afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting long golden shadows across the Blackwood estate. But for the first time in years, the shadows didn't feel oppressive. They felt like a stage for something miraculous. Ethan sat on a marble bench at the edge of the lawn, his expensive suit jacket discarded on the grass, his tie loosened. He watched with an intensity that bordered on obsession. "Again," Emma said gently. In the shallow inflatable pool at the bottom of the slide, Noah was floating on his back. Emma's hands were underneath his small hips, barely touching him, just offering a ghost of support. "Kick, Noah! Kick the water monster!" Emma cheered. Noah squeezed his eyes shut and splashed. It wasn't a coordinated swim stroke, but it was movement. Vigorous, intentional movement. The water resistance allowed his atrophied muscles to work without the crushing weight of gravity. Ethan watched, mesmerized. "Hydrotherapy," he murmured to himself. It was so simple. He had spent millions on exoskeletons and electrical stimulation devices that the boys screamed at, yet here was a solution that cost a few $100s and required only patience. "Why do they do it for you?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. He stood up and walked to the edge of the pool. "When I enter the room, they freeze. When the doctors come, they cry." Emma looked up, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. She didn't stop supporting Noah. "Because you look at them with fear, Mr. Blackwood, and the doctors look at them with pity. Children are like mirrors. If you look at them like they are broken, they will act broken. If you look at them like they are strong, they will try to be strong." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He knelt by the pool. I didn't want to hurt them. I lost their mother. I couldn't bear to lose them too." "Protecting them from life isn't saving them," Emma said softly. She turned to Noah. "Okay, Bug, time to switch. Liam needs the water." As Emma lifted Noah out of the pool, Ethan instinctively reached out to help. "Let me take him." Noah shrank back, his small, wet body tensing up. He looked at his father's large hands as if they were weapons. The rejection stung worse than acid. "It's okay, Noah," Emma soothed, rubbing the boy's back. "Daddy is strong. Daddy is going to carry you to the towel station. It's part of the game. He's the giant transport." "Giant?" Noah whispered, eyeing Ethan. "A gentle giant." Emma smiled at Ethan. "Go on." Ethan swallowed hard. He moved slowly, terrified of breaking the spell. He slid his hands under his son. Noah was so light, too light. But as Ethan lifted him, he felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years, tension in the boy's core. Noah was holding himself up. He wasn't dead weight. "I've got you," Ethan whispered into Noah's hair, smelling the chlorine and baby shampoo. "I've got you, son." For a brief, fleeting second, Noah rested his head on Ethan's shoulder. It was the first voluntary contact in half a life. Ethan closed his eyes, fighting back tears. But the moment was fragile and it was about to be shattered. From the direction of the main house, the sound of an engine roared. Not a car, but a convoy. A sleek black Mercedes van with tinted windows, followed by Ms. Havisham's sedan, screeched to a halt on the gravel driveway nearby. The doors slid open. Dr. Aris stepped out. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a grey suit, with silver hair and an air of absolute authority. Behind him trailed 2 younger doctors and a nurse carrying a heavy metal case of equipment. Ms. Havisham was right behind them, pointing accusingly at the scene on the lawn. "There!" she shouted. "Look at this circus. Unsanitary conditions, unsupervised physical exertion." The atmosphere in the garden changed instantly. The boys sensed it. Liam, who had been climbing the ladder, froze. Mason stopped crawling. Noah, in Ethan's arms, went rigid. Emma stood up, her hands instinctively going to her apron, wiping the water away nervously. Dr. Aris walked onto the grass, his face a mask of professional disdain. He didn't look at the children. He looked at Ethan. "Mr. Blackwood," Aris said, his voice smooth and cold. "Ms. Havisham called me in a panic. She claims you have suspended the prescribed treatment protocol in favor of..." He gestured vaguely at the inflatable slide with a look of disgust. Backyard games. It's not a game, Ethan said, his voice hardening as he held Noah tighter. It's therapy. Look at them, Doctor. Noah is holding his head up. Liam was climbing. Dr. Aris sighed, the way a parent sighs at a naive child. Ethan, we have discussed this. The spinal shock was severe. What you are seeing is likely spasticity, involuntary muscle contractions caused by the cold water and the adrenaline of fear. It is not functional movement. It is a reflex, a spasm. It didn't look like a spasm, Ethan insisted. And you are a software engineer, not a neurologist, Aris snapped, losing his patience. He turned to his team. Get the boys inside, immediately. We need to do a full assessment to see if this reckless endangerment has caused further spinal compression. No, Liam cried out as the nurse approached him. It's okay, Liam, Emma stepped forward. I'll come with you. You will stay right here, Ms. Havisham hissed, blocking Emma's path. You've done enough damage. Let her come, Ethan ordered. The boys trust her. If you want to examine them, she is present. Dr. Aris narrowed his eyes at Ethan. Very well, but bring them to the medical wing. We need a sterile environment. The fantasy ends now. As the staff collected the children, the vibrant energy of the garden evaporated. The bright colors of the slide seemed to dull. Ethan walked behind them, feeling a cold pit in his stomach. He had seen the truth with his own eyes, but now, faced with the weight of medical science, doubt began to creep back in. Was he just a grieving father seeing what he wanted to see? Was Emma just a kind-hearted girl who didn't understand anatomy? He looked at Emma walking beside him. She looked small, trembling, but her chin was up. Don't let them break their spirit, she whispered to Ethan. That's the only thing keeping them moving. The medical wing of the Blackwood mansion was a stark contrast to the garden. It was white, chrome, and smelled of antiseptic. It was, for all intents and purposes, a private hospital. The triplets sat on 3 separate examination tables, stripped of their wet swim trunks and put into paper gowns. The joy was gone from their faces. They looked small, pale, and terrified. Dr. Aris snapped on a pair of latex gloves. The sound echoed in the silent room. We will begin with the reflex tests, Aris announced. He approached Mason. Ethan stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching like a hawk. Emma stood near the door, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had been ordered not to speak. Dr. Aris took a reflex hammer and tapped Mason's knee. Nothing happened. He tapped again, harder. A slight twitch. See? Aris looked at Ethan. Minimal reflex response, consistent with paralysis. He then took a sharp metal pin. Sensory test. He pricked the bottom of Mason's foot. Mason didn't flinch. He just stared at the wall, his eyes glassy. No sensation, Aris concluded. If he could walk as you claim, he would have retracted his foot. He's scared, Emma blurted out. He's freezing up. You're treating him like a specimen, not a boy. Silence, Ms. Havisham snapped. Doctor, Aris turned to Emma, his eyes cold. Young woman, fear does not stop a sensory nerve from firing. If the nerve is severed, it is severed. You have been manipulating their limbs, probably physically moving them yourself, and convincing yourself, and Mr. Blackwood, that it is progress. It is a delusion. And it is cruel. He turned to Ethan. Ethan, look at the MRI scans on the screen. Look at the lesions on the spine. Science does not lie. What you saw in the garden was a trick of the light. Or perhaps the boys were throwing their weight around using their upper bodies, creating the illusion of walking. But they cannot walk. And by putting them on slides and ladders, you are risking spinal shear. One wrong slip and they could stop breathing. Ethan looked at the screens, the grey and black images of his son's spines. He looked at the doctors in their white coats, nodding in agreement. Then he looked at his sons. They were slumped over, looking exactly as helpless as the doctors said they were. They weren't moving. They weren't climbing. They were just broken. The doubt overwhelmed him. Ethan was a man of logic, of data. The data said they were paralyzed. The drone footage, maybe he had wanted to believe it so badly, he had hallucinated the extent of it. He was climbing, Ethan whispered weakly. I saw him climbing. He was dragging himself, Aris corrected, using his arms, which is dangerous for his shoulder joints. Aris took off his gloves and threw them in the bin. My recommendation is immediate bed rest for 48 hours to monitor for inflammation. And I strongly recommend a change in staff. You need certified medical professionals, Ethan, not... He looked at Emma with disdain. Playmates. Ms. Havisham stepped forward, a triumphant smirk on her face. I have the termination papers ready, sir. We can have her escorted out within the hour. Ethan felt the room spinning. He looked at Emma. She was looking at him, pleading with her eyes. Fight for them, her eyes said. But Ethan looked at the boys. Mason was crying silently. Noah was sucking his thumb. They looked miserable. Maybe Aris was right. Maybe he had endangered them. The guilt crashed down on him, heavy and suffocating. He couldn't risk hurting them again. He couldn't be the reason they got worse. Ethan, Emma whispered. Tell them. Ethan closed his eyes. He took a deep, shuddering breath. When he opened them, the fire was gone, replaced by the dull grey of resignation. Pack your things, Emma, he said, his voice hollow. What? Emma gasped. The triplets looked up simultaneously. You heard the doctor, Ethan said, turning his back to her so he wouldn't have to see her face. I can't risk their safety. I can't do this on a hope. I need certainty. Certainty? Emma's voice broke. You are choosing a piece of paper over your own sons. You are choosing the wheelchair over the legs. Security, Miss Havisham barked. 2 guards entered the room. Please, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. Let me say goodbye. Just let me say goodbye to them. Please, they are scared. Ethan didn't turn around. He nodded once, a barely perceptible motion. Make it quick, Dr. Aris muttered, checking his watch. Emma wiped her face and walked over to the examination tables. She didn't look defeated. She looked heartbroken. She went to Noah first. She kissed his forehead. You are a tiger, remember? She whispered loud enough for the room to hear. Strong legs, strong heart. She went to Liam. Don't let the nose get inside your head, Lily. You climbed the mountain. I saw you. Finally, she went to Mason, the smallest, the most sensitive. He was sobbing now, reaching out for her. Emma. No, go, he mumbled. His speech was usually delayed, but the words were clear. I have to, sweetie, Emma said, hugging him tight. She pulled back and looked him in the eye. But you don't need me to be strong. You have the magic inside you, remember? The magic is in the muscle. She stood up. She looked at Ethan's back one last time. You are making a mistake, Mr. Blackwood. One day you will watch that drone footage again, and you will realize you sent away the only person who believed in them. She turned and walked toward the door. The guards flanked her. The room was silent, save for the hum of the medical machinery. Then a sound broke the silence, a scrape. Ethan's ears pricked up. Emma! It was Mason. Ethan turned around slowly. Mason was not sitting on the table anymore. He had slid off the edge. His feet were on the floor. He was holding onto the edge of the metal table with white-knuckled grip. Emma! He screamed again, a raw, guttural sound of abandonment. Dr. Aris frowned. Nurse, put him back on the table. No! Mason shrieked. He pushed the nurse's hand away. He looked at the door where Emma was disappearing. The desperation in his small face was absolute. He didn't understand the politics or the medicine. He only knew that his safety, his joy, his mom figure was leaving. Mason let go of the table. Dr. Aris gasped, Catch him! But nobody moved fast enough. Mason didn't fall. He wobbled, his knees buckled, shaking violently. But he locked them. He stood. Alone. In the middle of the sterile white room, without braces, without water, without help. He took a step, a clumsy, flat-footed step, then another. Emma! He was walking toward the door. Ethan felt his heart stop. The world narrowed down to that tiny boy in the paper gown. Dr. Aris stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. The clipboard in Ms. Havisham's hand slipped and clattered to the floor, echoing like a gunshot. Mason took a third step. Then his leg gave out, and he began to tip forward. But he didn't hit the ground. Ethan moved, faster than he had moved in years. He dove across the room, sliding on his knees, and caught Mason just before he hit the tiles. He held his son tight, looking up at the shocked faces of the doctors. Mason was crying into Ethan's chest. Bring Emma back, he sobbed. Daddy, Bring Emma back." Ethan looked at the door. Emma had stopped. She was standing in the doorway, tears flowing freely, looking at Mason. Ethan slowly stood up, lifting Mason effortlessly into his arms. He felt the boy's legs wrap around his waist. Wrap around his waist, not dangle, squeeze. He turned to Dr. Aris. The rage that filled him now was cold, precise, and terrifying. "Get out," Ethan said. "Ethan, this is clearly an adrenaline response." Aris started stammering. "I said," Ethan raised his voice, the thunder returning, "get out. Take your machines, take your negativity, and get the hell out of my house." He turned to Miss Havisham, who was trembling. "And you're fired. If you aren't off this property in 10 minutes, I'm having you arrested for negligence." Ethan walked past the stunned doctors, carrying Mason toward the door. He stopped in front of Emma. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just a maid but the woman who had saved his family. "Don't go," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, show us the way." Emma smiled through her tears. She reached out and took Mason's hand. "Part 5 is going to be a new beginning," she whispered. Ethan turned back to the room, to his other 2 sons who were now watching with wide eyes, realizing the dynamic had shifted. "Come on, boys," Ethan said, extending his hand toward Liam and Noah. "Let's go back to the garden." The sound of the heavy front gates closing behind Dr. Aris's convoy echoed through the estate like the final note of a funeral march, signaling the end of an era. Inside the mansion, the air felt different. The sterile, suffocating silence that had ruled the Blackwood home for 2 years was gone, replaced by a tentative, fragile warmth. Ethan stood in the center of the grand foyer, still holding Mason in his arms. The little boy had stopped crying, his head resting heavily on his father's shoulder, his breathing evening out into a calm rhythm. Emma stood nearby, holding the hands of Noah and Liam, who were looking up at their father with a mixture of awe and caution. They were still in their paper medical gowns, looking like tiny angels who had crash-landed in a cold palace. "They took the wheelchairs," Liam whispered, pointing to the door where the medical staff had exited with their equipment. "We don't need them," Ethan said. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual corporate polish. He looked at Emma. "We don't need them, do we?" Emma shook her head, a soft smile playing on her lips. "No, sir. Not anymore." "Don't call me sir," Ethan said, shifting Mason's weight. "Not after today. You saved my sons. You saved me." He looked around the foyer. It was too big, too cold. "Let's go outside. The sun hasn't set yet. I want to see the rest. I want to see what I missed." They walked back out to the south lawn. The late afternoon light had turned deep amber, bathing the garden in a magical glow. The inflatable water slide still stood there, a bright, chaotic monument to rebellion against despair. Ethan set Mason down on the grass. The boy wobbled for a second, his legs shaking, but he found his balance. He looked at his brothers. "I walked," Mason announced, his voice filled with a pride that made Ethan's heart ache. "I walked to Emma." Noah and Liam looked at Mason's feet, then at their own. The competitive spark of brotherhood, long dormant under sedatives and braces, flickered to life. "I can walk too," Liam declared. He pulled away from Emma's hand. "Wait," Ethan said, instinctively reaching out. The fear was still there, a phantom limb in his mind. What if they fall? What if they break? Emma stepped in front of him, gently blocking his path. She reached out and touched his arm, a breach of protocol that felt entirely necessary. "Let them fall, Ethan. The grass is soft. If you catch them before they try, they will never know they can stand." Ethan looked at her, then at his sons. He took a deep breath, nodding. He reached up and undid his silk tie, pulling it from his neck and tossing it onto the manicured lawn. Next, he shrugged off his tailored charcoal jacket, dropping it carelessly into the mud. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves. He walked 5 paces away from the boys and dropped to his knees in the dirt. He was no longer the billionaire tech mogul towering over his subjects. He was a father, eye level with his children. "Okay," Ethan said, opening his arms wide. The vulnerability in his posture was absolute. "I'm right here. Who's next?" Liam bit his lip. He looked at the slide, then at his father. He took a deep breath, mimicking the exercises Emma had taught them. He placed his feet shoulder-width apart. He bent his knees slightly. "Eagle pose," Emma whispered from the sideline. Liam extended his arms for balance. He took one step. His foot dragged slightly, catching on the grass, and he pitched forward. Ethan flinched, his muscles coiling to spring forward, but he forced himself to stay frozen. Liam didn't cry. He caught himself on his hands, pushed back up, and grunted. "I okay? You're doing great, Lily," Emma cheered. "Up you go." Liam stood up again. This time he focused. He stared at his father's chest. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. The movement was jerky, unrefined, and beautiful. It was the walk of a child learning the world for the first time. When he reached Ethan, he didn't stop. He threw himself into his father's arms with enough force to knock Ethan back slightly. "I did it! I did it!" Liam screamed into Ethan's ear. Ethan wrapped his arms around the boy, burying his face in Liam's neck. "You did it, buddy. You're so strong. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm so sorry." Now only Noah was left. Noah, the oldest by 2 minutes, and the most serious. He stood by Emma's leg, clutching her apron. He watched his brothers in their father's arms. The longing on his face was palpable, but so was the fear. "I can't," Noah whispered. "Legs tired." Ethan looked up over Liam's shoulder. He saw the hesitation. He knew that look. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every morning, the fear of failure. "Noah," Ethan called out gently. "Do you remember the drone?" Noah blinked. "The flying robot?" "Yeah," Ethan smiled, tears tracking through the dust on his face. "I was flying it. I saw you on the slide. You were the highest. You were so brave. You slid down into the water like a superhero." Noah's eyes widened. "You saw me?" "I saw you," Ethan affirmed. "And I want to see you again. Not on a screen. Here. With me." He gently set Liam and Mason down next to him. "Call your brother, guys." "Come on, Noah," Mason yelled. "It's easy," Liam added. Emma knelt down beside Noah. She whispered something in his ear. Noah looked at her, then at his father. He took a deep breath. He didn't walk. He ran. It was a stumbling, chaotic, terrifying run. His legs crossed over each other. His arms flailed, but momentum carried him forward. He covered the distance in seconds, collapsing into the pile of his father and brothers. The impact knocked Ethan onto his back in the grass. Suddenly, he was covered in giggling, crying, wriggling boys. The weight of them was the best thing he had ever felt. He laughed, a rusty, broken sound that quickly turned into a sob, and then back into laughter. It was a release of 2 years of held breath. He rolled over, hugging them all, kissing heads, cheeks, hands. The barrier was gone. The glass wall he had built around his heart to keep the pain out had been shattered by 3 little boys and a maid with a water slide. As the laughter died down, replaced by the heavy, contented breathing of the exhausted triplets, Ethan sat up. He wiped his eyes with his dirty forearm. He looked over at Emma. She was still standing where the boys had left her, a few yards away. She was smiling, but there was a sadness in her eyes, a sense of distance. She was the staff. This was a family moment. She began to back away quietly, giving them space. "Where are you going?" Ethan asked. Emma stopped. I should go start dinner, Mr. Blackwood. The boys will be hungry after all this." "Ethan," he corrected her again. He gently untangled himself from the pile of boys and stood up. He walked over to her. The sunset was blazing behind him, casting a halo around his disheveled figure. "You aren't going to the kitchen," Ethan said firmly. Emma looked confused. "Sir." "I fired the nanny," Ethan said. "I fired the head housekeeper. I fired the medical team. This house is empty, Emma, except for us." He looked back at the boys, who were now wrestling in the grass, unconcerned with spines or braces. "I don't know how to be a father to them yet," Ethan admitted, his voice low and vulnerable. "I know how to buy things. I know how to hire people, but I forgot how to play. I forgot how to hope." He looked back at her, his blue eyes intense. "You brought them back to life, and you brought me back too. I don't want you to be the maid anymore." Emma's breath hitched. I don't understand. Be their governess. Be their guardian. Be whatever you want to be," Ethan said. "But stay. Not as staff who enters through the back door, but as part of this family. I need you to teach me. Teach me the hydrotherapy. Teach me the games. Teach me how to make them laugh like that. He reached out and took her hand. Her yellow rubber gloves were gone. Her hand was warm and calloused. Will you stay? Emma looked at the man in front of her. He wasn't the terrifying billionaire anymore. He was just a man, asking for help. She looked at the triplets who had stopped wrestling and were watching them. Yes, Emma whispered. I'll stay. Good, Ethan exhaled, a massive weight lifting from his shoulders. But, Emma added, a mischievous glint returning to her eye, there are conditions. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Name them. Anything. Double salary? A car? You have to go down the slide, Emma said, pointing to the inflatable monstrosity. Ethan blinked. He looked at the slide. It was wet, slippery, and definitely not designed for a 6-foot-tall man. You can't be serious. Daddy, slide! Daddy, slide! The chant started instantly. Liam began clapping. Mason joined in. Noah pumped his fist. Ethan looked at his ruined suit. He looked at the mud on his knees. He looked at Emma's challenging grin. Fine, Ethan groaned, unable to suppress a smile. Epilogue. 6 months later. The view from the drone was spectacular. It hovered high above the Blackwood estate, capturing the vibrant green of the summer. The tennis courts were no longer empty. They had been converted into a massive outdoor play area with swings, climbing frames, and a sensory garden. Ethan stood on the balcony holding the controller. But this time he wasn't hiding in his office. He was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, his skin tanned, his face relaxed. He guided the drone down toward the pool area. The footage on the screen showed a chaotic, beautiful scene. The inflatable slide was gone, replaced by a permanent professional-grade water park slide built into the landscape. Down below, 3 boys were running. Actually running. Their gaits were still slightly uneven, a unique rhythm that belonged only to them. But they were fast. Noah was chasing a golden retriever puppy. Liam was trying to do a handstand in the grass. Mason was sitting at a patio table, drawing with crayons. And sitting next to Mason, laughing as she poured lemonade, was Emma. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a summer dress, looking radiant and at home. Ethan brought the drone lower. The noise of its rotors caught their attention. All 3 boys looked up and waved. "Hi, Daddy," they screamed, their voices carrying clearly in the warm air. Emma looked up and shielded her eyes from the sun. She smiled, a smile that spoke of shared secrets, hard work, and a healing that went deeper than muscle and bone. She waved for him to come down. Ethan smiled back, even though she couldn't see it from that distance. He pressed the Return to Home button on the controller. The drone landed softly on the balcony railing. Ethan powered it down. He didn't need to watch them through a screen anymore. He didn't need the lens to filter his reality. He left the drone on the table and walked to the glass doors. He slid them open and stepped out, not into the silence of a mausoleum, but into the noise of a life fully lived. He took the stairs 2 at a time, eager to join the chaos below. The miracle wasn't that the boys could walk. The miracle was that they had all learned how to move forward, together. The end.